Now, we began yesterday and even earlier the discussion about Pigul, Machshavas Pigul, Chutzes Mano, Chutzim Komo, in the case of Mincha. And now we're up to the bottom right on on page Tes Zayin. And the Gemara says the following, and this is a sugya in Menachos on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. We have a principle called Ein Shnei Chatzoyim Mitztarfim. And that means that, let's say, we split between two machshavos of chutzes mano. One was on a chatzi zayis and the other was on another chatzi zayis. Then we don't integrate them into one whole, into one entity to generate a chiyuv kares if you eat the pigul. And therefore we need a machshava on one full kizayis of chutzes mano, chutzim koma, or a haktar of a kizayis, chutzes mano, chutzim koma. So if we only had a machshava on a chatzi zayis, that's not pigul. And let's say, for example, you had a machshava to eat a chatzi zayis of the shirayim, and he had another machshava to be maktir a chatzi zayis of the komets, and in both cases it was chutz lizmano or chutz l'komo, then we apply the principle of ein shnei chatzoyim mitztarf. Now, in the case of machshavas pigul, what's very crucial, and we have to be very meticulous, is what exactly did he say? What was his thought processes? What was his declaration? Listen to this subtle difference. Supposing he thought about the haktara as achila, and he declared that he's going to eat a chatzi zayis, and the eish of the mizbeach will eat a chatzi zayis. Again, all chutzes mano, chutzim kol. The Gemara establishes not in Menachos, but in Masechtas Vachim, that in this case, mitztarfim shnei chatzoyim likva pigul. Again, even though one machshava chutzes mano, chutzim was on a chatzi zayis, the other was on another chatzi zayis. One was on the chatzi zayis of achila, and the other was on the chatzi zayis of haktorah. But nevertheless, if he formulated his machshava of chutz lizmano on the haktorah, but he called it achila, and he said that the chatzi zayis of the achilas hamizbeach will take place tomorrow, chutz lizmano, that's mitztarif with the chatzi zayis of the achilas hashirayim chutz lizmano, according to the shita of the chacham. So it's amazing when we think about it that there's so much emphasis here on the exact way that he formulated it. You would say that one is achila, that's a chatzi zayis. The other is haktorah, that's a chatzi zayis. Ain't mitztarif, like the principle we saw before in the Mishnah. But the answer is, if he says about the haktorah, it's achila, that the achila of the mizbeach at the time of haktorah will take place tomorrow, then it's mitztarif with the achila of the Zichrei Kuna on the Shirai. However, Rabbi Elazar disagrees. Ein machshava saktora chutzes mano poseles ad sheyachshov lahaktiris kol hakometz shelo b'zmano. What you're telling me is that he had a machshava of chutzes mano on a chatzi zayis of haktorah. All right, he called it achila, but it's haktorah al gabi mizbeach. And there's no such thing as pigul on a chatzi shir. The haktorah of a chatzi zayis is not registered on the Richter scale as haktorah. So he never had a machshava of haktorah chutzes mano. And the chachamim disagree because they're willing to integrate his machshava on the haktorah of a chatzi zayis together with his machshava on the achila of chatzi zayis, and they integrate to form one whole and generate pigul within Isukah. Now, what happens if he has in mind the following two chatzizaisim? One chatzizais has in mind for achila chutz l'zmano, and the other chatzizais he has in mind for achila chutz l'nkomo. Can we integrate the two to generate a chiyuv kares of people? And this is a Mishnah in Menachos on Daf Yud Beis. And the Mishnah says, although the Shirayim are apostle because he had in mind a full kizayis, which would not be bismano bimkomo. So for that sake, from that perspective, vis-a-vis that thing we have tzira. But to generate a chiyuv kares of people, that we can't do. Because the chiyuv kares of people is the machshava chutz l'zmano. And in that machshava chutz l'zmano, we only had a chatzizayis in mind. So you have here, again, another example of so many examples of what I call a brisket svei dinim. There are two different dinim here. There's one din of tziruf of the two chatzizaisim as far as passing the carbon is concerned. Because at the end of the day, when you add half and half, you get a whole. He had a machshava that this mincha will be psula in a full kizayis. Half a zayis chutzim komo, half a zayis chutzim komo. But as far as the chutzim zmano that generates a chiyuv kares of pigul is concerned, he only had a chutzim zmano and a chatzizayis. And on the other chatzizayis, he had a machshav of chutzlim komo. That's not integrated into a full zayis' worth of chutzim zmano to generate a chiyuv kares in pigul. And now we get to a three-way machlokas. Okay. Now, the word sumsum, which is a sesame seed, is used as a metaphor, so to speak, for a sheer katan v'yoser, a very small amount. Now, the comments after the Kmitza requires haktarah. And the comments and its haktarah will be matir the shirayim, as we said over and over again. What happens if he has a machshava chutz l'zmano at the time of the haktaras ha-komets for a sumsum's worth of achilas hashirayim? The achilas shirayim should be chutz l'zmano, but only a sumsum's worth. Okay. So far, I don't see pigul here. But then, so that was all at the time of the Aktoras HaKomets. Now, he starts his Haktorah, we'll call it time T1, with a machshava that this Haktorah should be matir, the achila of the sumsum of the shirayim chutz l'zman. Now we get to time T2. He continues his Haktorah of the comets, and again he has a machshava on another additional sumsum's worth of shirayim that'll eat it chutz l'zman. And he goes on and on and on as he continues with the haktarah of the comets, and continuously, what's the word I'm looking for? Give me a second here. Shucks, at the tip of my tongue. What's the word in English when you have in Hebrew it's called hitztabrut, when you have an amalgamation. As you add X, Y, and Z, and you finally. So anyway, I'm looking for a word. It doesn't matter. Forget about my looking for a word. But in any event, at some point in time, as he continues through the Haftarah, bingo, he finally ends up with a machshava of a full kizayis' worth of achilas hashirayim chutz l'zmano. Because what he's doing is he's taking the komets and its Haftarah, and he's divided up into segments of time with a machshava of chutz l'zmano on different segments of a kizayis, which are called sumsum. V'chein himshich lahaktir, he continues his Haftarah, ad shekola kolach komets. He finishes the entire komets, burns the entire komets. Is here we have a three-way machlokas. Again, the names here are confusing because the Gemara mentions their names, but it doesn't tell us who holds what. So it's a machlokas of Chizda, of Hamduna, of Cheshes. One of them, we don't know who, is of the opinion that this is Pigul. And why is that so? The answer is derech hahaktorah v'derech achila. There's nothing unusual going on over here. Haftarah is a process that extends over a period of time. So it's achila, a process. And when he has in mind a correlation between the segment of the Haftarah, of the comments that he's doing now, and that segment of the Shirayim that will be permitted through the Haftarah of that segment of the comments, there is a correlation here. And it develops. He continues with the Haftarah. The continuing Haftarah with more and more machshavos on more and more parts of the Shirayim is called derech Haftarah. That can be integrated into what we call a normal perspective of Haftarah. However, now we get to the second opinion. Hamincha psula ach ein chiyuv kares. Why? Ein derech Haftarah b'kach. This is not the normal way that you do a Haftarah. V'hareze kemincha shelo huktar kumtza. Right? The chiyuv pigul only applies when all the materium were done and implemented kilchasam, kedasim kibin, just that at some point or other he had a machshava of chutz l'zman. But in this case, we consider it as a mincha shelo huktar kumtza, very extreme position. It's as if he never was mocked in the comments. What do you mean he never was mocked in the comments? That's not so. He was certainly mocked in the comments. But the answer is that since at every stage of his Haftarah, he had a machshava poseles, that we consider as if he was never mocked in the comments. And if he wasn't mocked in the comments, then this is not kol hamatir kil chasam, which is the prerequisite for pigul. That pigul has to be that all the matirim, meaning the whole comments, was burnt on the mizbeach kil chasam. It's not so. This is shalom kederech Haftarah. And then we get to the third opinion. A mincha kshera. Wow. Mishum shederech Haftarah b'kach. But we say that derech Haftarah b'kach therefore engenders pigul. And now you're saying the mincha is kshera. Aval ein zu derech achila the aim pigul el kshemachashiv lechol chutz lizmano kederech achila. And this is a sugya in Menachos Handaf Tezaino and Beis. Now, I can only do what I can do. I can only give you, if you're interested in my explanation of what's going on, I'm not totally sure that this is the bottom line here, the third shita, that the mincha is kshera. But he's saying that the essence of pigul is to set up an achila chutz l'zmano that's kiderech achila. Like, let's say, for example, the Kohen would have in mind at the time of the matir, whatever it is, zrika or haktaras hakometz, he would have in mind that half of that part of the shirayim, or for that matter, the entire shirayim, makes no difference, will be eaten chutz l'zmano while you're standing on your head. Clearly, shalom kederech achilasa. And it's interesting because what pigul does is, the way it impacts is within the framework of achila. You set up through your machshavas pigul as a Kohen, and achila chutz l'zmano, but it's got to be a normal achila that would qualify according to the legal halachic terms and categories as an achila, which is a normal achila. This case is not a normal achila. Now you'll ask me, why not? Why does he insist that this is shalo kederech achila? But the answer is because he's telling you that this sumsum's worth will not be eaten until tomorrow, and that sumsum's worth will not be eaten until tomorrow. He separates the achila into its minute segments, and that's not called derech achila. So the whole enterprise of pigul is out the window. Not even a psul in the karma. The middle shita that we had was that chosh is a psul in the karma. There's no pigul with a chiyuv karetz. And we had one opinion that said there's even a chiyuv karetz. And now it's saying the mincha is kshera according to this third. Okay. Now at this point here on page Tesnai, we move over to the left column. What's the relationship in terms of pigul between one matir and another? He opens the discussion by setting the following background: that chiyuv kares al pigul hu be ofet choshe b'shas havoda b'dovra matir machshava chutz l'zmano al dovra nitar. So you always have a matir and a nitar. You have kometz and shirayim. And he had a machshava at the time of the matir for the nitar chutz l'zmano, or let's say at the time of the zrikas adam, in the case of the zevach, he had in mind that the zrikas adam should matir achila in the basar karban chutz l'zmano. But there you have a relationship clearly between a matir and a nitar. So therefore, your classic structure of pigul in the case of a mincha will be shechashev b'shas hakmitza al haktoras hakometz or achilas hashirayim chutz l'zmano chutz l'mkol. Because kmitza is matir the haktorah and the achilas shirayim. Oh, now we get to the following issue. Chashav b'shas kmitza lahaktir es levona chutz l'zmano. In other words, we have two matirim here. Let's assume, and we're going to go through this right now, that these two matirim are independent. They're separate matirim. One is haktaras hakometz, and the other is haktaras halevona. He had in mind at the time of the kmitza, a chutz lizmano on the haktara of the levona. We're not talking about the shirayim. The shirayim is a nita. So that the actual kmitza is a matir for the kometz, meaning that now we have a kometz that we can bring on the mizbeach. It could be a matir vis-a-vis the shirayim, but could it be a matir vis-a-vis the aktar salavona? The aktar salavona itself is a matir. L'das Rabbi Yossi, now we have this big machlokus. Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that the minchas psula, but there's no kares on achilah, so it's not eagle. Why? Because the kometz and the levona are both matirim. Right? You're only allowed to eat the shirayim of the mincha after the kometz and the levona. So if you're having a machshav in the kometz for the levona, then you're being machashev between two matirim, from one matir to the other. The aim matir mefagel matir. There's no pigel from a matir to a matir. Pigel is only from a matir to a nita. The das chachamim yesh bazeh kares. Mishum shakometz v'alavona nechshavim kematir echad v'lo kishnei matirim. You know, the chacham are pulling a fast one here. They're telling me that these are not two matirim; they are one matir. So if he has in mind at the time of the kometz the haktara salavona, and I integrate the haktara salavona together with the haktara of the kometz as one matir, then this becomes pigul. What makes them into one matir? What integrates the kometz with the levona? It's the fact that they are all placed together in one kli. Although we did say, if you recall, that we push the levona to one side of the kli, but they're all in the same kli. It says B'shnei matir she'ena mitztar from the kliyach and kigod shnei kivsei atzeres shematirim es halechem im chishev b'shchitas echad me'amanas lechol mechaver chutz zman amodum chachamim she'ein bo kares. So he's saying on the footnote here that it's not automatic that if you put the two matirim into one kli that makes it integrates into one matir with pigul. That's not so. It's only when the two matirim are mitztaref in kli echad, meaning it's not just that you happen to use kli echad, but the kli echad is indicative and it's required of an integration of the two matirim into one matir. And therefore, he says that the chacham would be moded that there's no pigul in the case of kivsei atzeres, right? These are two kvasim that are brought on Chag HaShavuos to accompany the Shtei Lechem. And these two kvasim are matir the Shtei Lechem. And now he had a machshava at the time of the shechita of one of these two kvasim to eat the other keves chutz zman. And it's irrelevant as to whether or not he put the two kvasim into one kli. It would still not be pigul here, and even the chacham would agree there's no pigul because we're talking about two matir. The fact that they coincidentally happen to be put in one kli doesn't allow you to be mitzaref. Masha Enkein, kometz and levona, they are mitzaref to one kli. And the tzir of kli makes them into one matir. That's why the chacham hold is correct. Just try to finish this last paragraph here. Machsheves achila v'aktor al dvarim shein darkon b'kach. What happens if he has a machshava to eat, again, chutz l'zmano, the kometz itself? Now, the kometz requires haktorah. Or, for example, let's say he had a machshava to be maktir the shirayim chutz l'zmano. There's no din of haktorah with regard to shirayim. So just like in the case of the kometz, which is ein roy lachila, so too in the case of shirayim, it's ein roy laktorah. Echonим say there's no pigul. It can't be a machshavas pigul on something that's not roy lakah. That you set up a chutz l'zmano, but on something that, you know, you can have an achil of shirayim, you can have aktorah of kometz, but to set up a chutz l'zmano on achilas hakometz, or on aktoras hashirayim, that makes no sense. Now, Mirza Hashem, tomorrow I want to study with you the opinion of the dissenting view of Rabbi Eliezer. I mean, he says there is pigul here, but we're going to have to see this gigantic. I mean, Rabbi Eliezer invokes or generates a whole literature here, exactly how to understand it. So that's what we'll, with Mitzvah Shem, make a note. That's what we want to discuss today.